Hey, this is Roland here. We're doing something new over our summer break. And as you know, we do have those breaks over the summer and over the holidays and all these things that you can relax and um, refresh a little bit. But we obviously also don't want you to be not hearing from what's your baseline. So what we do is, because we've grown immensely over the last couple of years, we want to cater something into your feed that you have not or might not have seen before. Because in season 2, we started a little sideshow, if you will, called What's Your Baseline Shorts. These were our first dabbling with videos, but also 15 minutes, one conversation, barely an edit, just JM and I talking about things. And during our summer break, we're just gonna push back some of those older episodes of What's Your Baseline Shorts into your feed every Wednesday. And without further ado, today is the first one. And in this one, we're going to have a look at What's Your Baseline Shorts number 1, where JM and I were talking about the ultimate timeless battle of EPC versus BPMN. Enjoy.
Hello and welcome to What's Your Baseline Shorts. We're taking a look today at one of the topics with the most contention in terms of modeling notation in Roland and my life. So first and foremost, my name is J.M. Erlinson. I'm an architecture and business process expert and excited to talk to you about how we look at process notations. And Roland?
Yeah, I'm Roland Volt, and I was the guy who had the idea for these shenanigans here. And otherwise, read up my bio.
As you can tell, this What's Your Baseline Shorts is unscripted, but it's exciting to take on some of these topics in a shorter format so you can understand how we bring these all together. And this one is all about talking about BPMN and EPC. No, first and foremost, Roland, what do you think about BPMN and EPC? What are they, and why are they different, and how do they relate to the way people do their process modeling and process on architecture?
So that will be a very short session. BPMN 1, end of story.
Oh, wow. Actually, I don't think it should be quite that short. I think there's a lot more to discuss about it. But first and foremost, tell us about BPMN and EPC. Tell us about
yeah, they're both process notations, right? So process notations literally to be able to show from the beginning of a process through certain steps to the end of the process and who's doing it and which apps are used and all these type of things. So they both capture the same information. They do it just in a different way. They represented it in a different way. And when you think about it, EPC, which by the way stands for Event-Driven Process Chain, was invented in the late 80s, early 90s as part of the whole ARIS method by Dr. Scheer in Germany, and became the de facto standard in the 90s and the 2000s for SAP implementations. So you see things, the same things that you see in BPMN, right? So you see events, you see tasks, you see roles, you see apps, risks, and all that type of stuff. There's some certain semantic coming with it. And EPCs can have swim lanes or no swim lanes and basically show the content. But JM, what is BPMN?
Well, that's a great question. BPMN stands for Business Process Model and Notation. And BPMN is a sort of rigorous guideline for how to document swim lanes, primarily swim lanes, your business process flow. So once again, the same sort of symbology you'd see, but it's maintained by a larger group that sort of governs a lot of things. That group, I believe, also does something around DMN. They at least tried to get the decision model and notation standard. That's the OMG, correct?
Yeah, it's the Object Management Group. That's the name group of that organization. But
so it's a sort of an independent. They're not attached to any given platform. I think EPC is much more synonymous with the ARIS platform or with SAP. Although there are other platforms that certainly use EPC as how they do their modeling. And BPMN has a few different standards. It's come through a couple different evolutions from the old BPMN 1 spec that had sort of different types of diagrams that you could go into and very just basic shapes that you would work with that indicated the programmatic logic of how a process should work, to what now is sort of the BPMN 2.0 to X standard, really 2.0, which is all about bringing this bunch of different types of sub symbols so you can be more specific about the type of task you're doing, and mostly talking about process collaboration diagrams. There are other types of BPMN models. We mostly deal with process and collaboration.
Yeah, let me stop here. So that's a good point, JM. So BPMN does not have only one model type. BPMN actually has
much.
4 model types, right? And so the spec is much wider, and it should show things on different levels. The collaboration shows the, whatever, 30,000 foot or 10,000 foot view, how participants interact with each other, versus the BPMN collaboration diagram actually shows that on a who does what when where level. And I think the biggest difference is the intention for both notations. For EPC, that's embedded in a bigger framework, if you will, where you have value chain diagrams and you can jump to org charts and all these type of things. Mm-hmm. While in BPMN, the main purpose is supporting automation of processes. So
right. Interchange language .bpmn is a perfect example of that. Like, they standardize on a way of importing and exporting from tools that are compliant to the BPMN 2.0 spec to create .bpmn files that other tools that are compliant to that spec can import. That could be including like business rules engines, or like some RPA tools work with that. Some larger
process
systems
mining.
ERPs can process mining, those sorts of things. So they really designed it. But once again, it is programmatic. And this is where I think I want to turn the conversation a little bit, because I think, Roland, you and I are on different sides here. I mean, I think you started the conversation by saying BPMN 1. And that's, in some ways, I think that you're right about some of the market penetration things, but I don't think it won in a lot of spaces that I play in. And I don't think it should win for a lot of reasons. And first and foremost is that BPM asks a different question than EPC by its very nature. In fact, every sort of swim lane modeling methodology asks a different question based off of its very nature, right?
Hold on. You can draw a BPMN diagram without swim lanes, and you have a still legal BPMN diagram.
It's true, but most people that I work with think of BPMN as swim lane models. In fact, often they don't even say BPMN. They're just drawing things in BPMN format because whatever tool they're using requires that. But generally, when we're looking at BPMN, people are often thinking, maybe it's not in all cases, but people are often thinking, who does this? What does this first? Mm-hmm. And that conversation is what I call actor focused. They're thinking, first and foremost, who does it? And then answering the question, what do they do? Whereas when you look at EPC, top down or side on or whatever, they have this idea of satellites. The idea is that a task, around that task is splayed all of the contextual information that should inform what that task does, including people. So that means it's a function focused instead of an actor focused.
So that means it's more cluttered and harder to read?
In some cases, absolutely. But think about it, BPMN, a lot of that information is either lost because the BPMN 2.0 spec does not include risk. It does not include capability. I don't think it includes anything to do with customer journeys.
It doesn't. Not at all.
It's missing a lot of information. So where I've seen a lot of people doing is they put that information in like textual attributes on the BPMN object itself. That stuff goes there to die. It's incredibly hard to maintain text attributes.
Or your tool allows you to create relationships to other objects that exist somewhere else, which is, I think, the more elegant way. I think
they extend the BPMN spec. Yes.
Yeah. I think the biggest difference between those two is not so much is it actor driven, is it process driven or step driven. I think the biggest difference is BPMN to me has a little bit of that geeky and technical flair to it. It has a boatload of different symbols. For example, when you look at events, who knows what a non-interrupting event-driven intermediate event is, right?
Yeah.
So it's super geeky. And the first thing when I do implementations is basically talk to the client and say, hey, can we simplify this? What do you really need, right? And then there's some room for improvement, if you will, in the spec itself. There's some conflicting or not well-defined things in there that you see. So to give you an example, when you have a task that does not have a little sub-symbol that classifies it as a manual task or an automated task, it doesn't matter. It's a generic thing. But when you go to gateways, right? So the object that routes process flows, not make the decision that routes it because the decision was made in the step before.
The logical routing,
The empty gateway means XOR, while the spec also has an XOR symbol. So it's inconsistent and illogical there. But these are all the quirks that you see there.
No, and I agree that it is a more geeky language in a lot of ways. And And in being geekier, I think it gives you a huge advantage and a huge disadvantage. The
Mhm.
advantage is that people who are thinking programmatic logic, who come from that background, they understand it like instantly. They go, okay, I see what this is doing. I can follow this. And I'm using systems that will understand and accept this the same way I do.
Yeah.
I've built this ecosystem around myself, and perfect.
That's
But it's hard for your senior stakeholders,
yeah.
right? They're not going to understand this as well because you can't communicate that. So I see people redoing BPMNs often in PowerPoint and just turning it into something simple so they can talk to a senior leader. That's like double work for every single word.
Did you notice how it just shrunk by an inch or so when you said that? That's horrible. But yes, I agree. So simplification is the key. I think that's one takeaway when working with BPMN. The other one is, which is where I actually have a beef with, is BPMN, because it has that automation flavor, does not know hierarchies. So it has an object in there that's called sub-process, and people say, oh yeah, it's a sub-process, a level below, and I can drill down 7 levels below. And the answer is no, you don't. Sub-processes as objects are meant to expand and contract, right? So that you have a better readability of your models, right? To say, okay, I can capture this type of content, put a box around it, and just show the box named sub-process. It's not, for what it's worth, it's also not reusable content, which is something that people who use a tool like Ares sometimes forget. For that, BPMN has a different symbol called call activity, which in all seriousness I've never seen used in a real life process.
No.
But anyways, so that's my biggest beef. And of course, you mentioned it. It's not meant for strategy modeling. It's not meant for org modeling and all those things. And I typically point clients to chapter 7 of the spec. Oh, is that scary that I read it so often that I know where to find it? Ooh. Where on one page it describes what it's for and what it's not for. But maybe to bring this to a closure, I'm still a fan of BPMN, not because everybody and their grandmother uses it. I'm a fan of it because it's an independent standard. Standards are good. If you wouldn't have standards, you could not plug in your laptop in an outlet, right? You could not have an adapter if you travel overseas and plug it in those outlets in there. So standards are good. And I think that is the big key for me. The second big key for me is what you mentioned before. It's not just a notation, a pretty picture in a diagram. It's also a file format. And if it's standardized, and unfortunately the reality is it isn't, right? Or no, let me rephrase that. It's standardized, but the implementation in different tools is not consistent. If that comes to a little bit more maturity, well, then you can do those things like automation, process mining, all those wonderful things that I think everybody wants. And I think this is where we want to be, right? You don't want to be tied to your tool. You want to be tied to your content. You want to take that content and be able to transform it into something that you can use elsewhere. And I think that's the main reason why I'm a big fan of BPMN.
And I think that that's a great note to leave this episode on. We like both these standards. I think that we both agree that EPC has the capacity to tell a better story and a more comprehensive story. But the truth of the matter is more tools speak BPMN. And with an independent standard maintained by, I could say debatably a resilient group. The OMG's been around for a long time. They show no signs of slowing down. I have no reason to believe they won't continue to maintain this.
And the major tool vendors are part of that. You see the IBMs in there, you see the Megas in there, you see the Software AGs in there. So it's all a consortium of the different firms, and everybody has their stake in there with a little twist in there. But I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, so tell your story, however it makes most sense. But from our perspective, BPMN is more transportable. EPC is a better storyteller. Now it's up to you. And so we leave you on this point for this What's Your Baseline Shorts. Well, any last thoughts, Roland, before we go to
a very last thought is I wrote 2 articles about the comparison about EPC and BPMN.
Did you?
Back in 2011. So take it with a grain of salt. You obviously find that on our website, what'syourbaseline.com. And I will put some links in the show notes somewhere here.
And that's a great pitch for what'syourbaseline.com. Remember, folks, that's got all the information about this episode, all of our other episodes from the podcast. And of course, you can always leave us feedback there, because these What's Your Baseline Shorts are meant to answer the hot questions you've got burning in in your heart. So if you can answer those for us, and give us some topics you'd like us to talk about, we guarantee you we'll take a look at them and maybe even show them on one of our future shorts.
Well then, JM.
Well then, Roland, I'm JM.
I'm Roland, and I'll see
We'll
you in the
see
next
you in
one.
the next one.